You're listening to the Middlemen podcast with me, Tom Lemongello, and my co-host Todd Zawicki. Our careers have put us in the middle between retail, media, and brands. But retail media is a closed loop, so we're here to open up the channel and let you listen in. Join our discussions with the people who make retail media happen. Hey Todd, we've been back from Shoptalk for a bit. We actually just had an episode with Costco, and I think it was actually a really informative one, which we can use to put in perspective who we talked to today, Troy Townsend, the CEO of Zitcha.
Zitcha is really an interesting story because their product is about how do I catalog all my trade offerings, which includes retail media. And we talk about the three pillars of retail media: in-store, online, and offline. And you start, and I think that's one of the key messages that comes out of Shoptalk, which is that retail media really belongs as a part of trade. Online.
Yeah, I mean, we heard from Mark Williamson that his opportunity, you can't get around the merchant. The opportunity for the retail media team is to operationalize all the marketing. And that could be the trade marketing, it could be the on-site, it could be the off-site, and it could be the in-store digital media. But it could even be, to what we're going to talk about with Troy, the old school stickers, wobblers, signage that's made out of paper still.
And why learning terms like wobblers as a non-retail guy is hilarious to me, and learning all these conversations like the RMNs,
there's some old school stuff out there,
wobblers, and things like that. So it's interesting language to learn about. But I think it's fascinating because there's the classic technology adoption curve where we've all seen the graph that goes up and the hype, and then the post initial hype fad stage, you get this trough of disappointment, and then the business builds to a proper maturity over time. And I think one of the interesting things as we come out of Shoptalk is I'm not sure we're seeing this trough of disappointment around retail media, because what's happening from my perspective is it's not that retail media is eating trade. It's that trade is really eating retail media, or adopting it, or merging with it, co-opting it. Like it's there. You don't have to have a trough of disappointment here because trade dollars exist. They're not going away. And you're seeing conversations around different entities merging trade and retail media teams, like best we've talked about.
I think you may have put out a new tagline for us that we're going to have to use over and over, just like Eric Suford's Everything is an Ad Network. Trade is eating retail media. I like it.
And it's a good thing, right? In the sense there's real dollars. And so what, to me, I think it also speaks to the comments we've made in prior episodes where we talk about is the real split between retail media and trade is the split between endemic, meaning trade, and non-endemic, meaning retail media. Retail media does unlock non-endemic in a way that you couldn't otherwise do in times of retail environment. And I think that's hugely important. Retailers and their margins are tight, and the ability to pull non-endemic dollars in is real huge opportunity for them. And so and also there might be what quote unquote trade opportunities, traditional trade opportunities, like that Zitcha, by cataloging, identifying, and pulling it all into a single kind of view of what is available, you might start selling some of those things to non-endemic buyers.
Yeah, I look at it as you have a mix of channels that some of them are good at measurement, some of them are not. You have some things that are cheaper because they're made of paper, others are made out of screens. If you put all this stuff together holistically, you can do a better job of the entire funnel. And to your point, maybe that helps the Capital Ones and the travel advertisers and all these other ones who do care about grocery shoppers, club shoppers. Maybe that helps them understand how the buy works.
And part of what it really is, the quote unquote phrase, everything's an ad network, what it really means is if you have an audience, and retailers do, they have human beings, they have identified human beings, they have profiled audience. There are marketers who want to reach those people. And if you have the ability to connect advertisers or marketers to those people, then you're selling advertising in some way, shape, or form. And I think retailers are learning that. And I think the other thing that comes out of Shoptalk, and you start talking about Zitcha, and you start thinking about this catalog approach, I just don't see a self-serve reality in the near term for retail media or trade.
Yeah, that's something that for me hit a chord. I'm like, oh, I really like the idea of bringing all of the tactics of trade under one unified front door or one unified dashboard. But I have scars from Quotient where I was told when it comes to self-service, let's say in 2022, the market was really calling for self-service to the point where Forrester, when they did their new market survey of the retail media DSPs, they were giving the highest marks to DSPs that were saying that self-service was the future. And I think that would make sense if the channels were set. And so we know there's mobile, we know there's on-site, we know there's off-site. But even then, we were bringing out of home into the mix. CTV was around the corner. And now bringing the digital out of home technology into the store and all the complexity there, to me, means the overall marketing mix is getting more complicated and it's not ready for self-service. But the truth is that self-serve was not how we unlock retail media, because self-serve means more operational requirements, more heads.
And I think that the thing about self-serve, having built the DSP and come from that world, which is self-serve makes sense when it's a commoditized, understood product and offering. Search is a good example, does great with self-serve. The ad buyers understand how that world works and what it means. And our world is not, and retail media world is not that. If we think about the fact we're just beginning to catalog, and there's all these offline pieces that are just beginning to get understood. And actually, by the way, cataloging quote unquote trade into and treating it more like retail media is a great example of growing up and maturing and having trade benefit from the developments of retail media and adopting technologies and platforms that think, oh, I could actually catalog my trade offerings really for the first time. But without standardization, it's hard for people who aren't familiar to buy things. And so I think just we're at the orchestration stage, or at least cataloging and understanding what the heck I have to offer, but then having teams that can help work with advertisers or marketers or vendors to help them understand the different offerings and the value, like what's appropriate for when measurement's required, what's appropriate for not, what's appropriate for different types of categories, like travel versus financial services versus others for non-endemic categories. Yeah. So I think there's great opportunities here coming out of Shoptalk, which is trade and retail media are really one and the same thing. Really, we should be talking about endemic versus non-endemic. And trade growing up and maturing is a great thing. And retailers are going to be able to rationalize and more professionally manage it. And when you see people helping build retail media, and again, whether it's the products like Zitcha and others, they're cool products and they're going to solve a problem for retailers just in terms of helping get their hands around this messiness of trade. Like if you talk to most retailers, trade is it's mess. It's been hand built. It's so bespoke. It's just unbelievable. And so moving it in the direction of retail media and more productized, systematized, professionally managed and priced and tracked and packaged, that's great for where this is going.
And I think Troy is coming from the Facebook world. So he's a little ahead of the market, and he's come on, guys, we can do this.
And I think retailers are beginning to realize that they do have, I think, a pile of gold here. I think there absolutely is a pile of gold as you add on retail media to trade and expand it and allow retailers, but by professionalizing trade, by leveraging some learnings of retail media, like how do you package and sell things, like the lessons of the online ad world. There's a lot of great learnings about how to sell and package and market these things that I think going into these organizations is really going to supercharge. And retailers are right to be excited about this. And they're right that it will lend themselves to make more money and more margin over time. And that's, to me, the story of trade. Retail media is about trade growing up and going into the next generation and the 21st century. And I think that's awesome.
All right, let's get into it. Todd and I had a bit of a late night at a casino last night. There was a power outage, but we made it. We're still here. And we're excited to be here with you, Troy. Troy Townsend is the CEO of Zitcha. Your background was you've been an entrepreneur your whole career, right?
Pretty much. Yeah. For a good 25 years. This is my third business.
So the first one that you told me about, or the formative one that helped you get to Zitcha, was helping small businesses with their Facebook business. Right?
Yeah, basically we automated the process of building ads for big channel partners that brought on SME businesses. Through the journey of Facebook, as they went into an ad business, a lot of yellow page businesses, a lot of big publishing businesses turned into big digital agencies. So we basically help them onboard SMEs at scale and then automate the process of building ads for plumbers and HVAC businesses across the world. Yep.
So what is it that made you think it was time to move up into the retailer space?
Exiting that business, we started to play in the process of working on big franchise networks. So not only did we work with SMEs, but we worked with big franchise networks. And we started to see structure within the Meta environment around how the retailer or the brands worked with the individual advertisers. So when I exited Tiger Pistol, Meta hit me up and said, hey, there's an opportunity here. We have a product for retail called Collab Ads. It's really well received, but we're looking at how do we scale this thing. And I've been working within the Meta ecosystem for 10 years. So
Yeah, they sold that pretty hard. I remember when I was at Quotient, we tried to do their CAPI, or basically trying to give them our purchase data, and they were very excited about that idea, and we were not, and neither were the retailers. And then collaborative ads came along, and by that time we were already over hearing how the social networks wanted to work with retailers. So we'd love to hear more about that.
I think the big thing that I saw coming from a world of being really focused on Facebook into the retail ecosystem was just the inability 4 years ago when I started this journey and did my due diligence is like, how can retailers scale in this space? What are the products that they need to bring to market? We saw that the connection of value between what a Facebook was doing versus what a retailer was doing, and then how do we just help connect the dots and transition retailers from a very manual process to something that can be quite scalable. So my due diligence of just looking at Meta as a channel then led into actually going, there's a much bigger play here for the retailers, not just to run Meta as a channel, but also run all of their channels through a single view so they can maximize the value of what they're building without building a massive headcount business that just affects the margins that they're actually building towards.
So what I've been hearing, especially here at Shoptalk, is that there's a lot of companies out there. I came from Quotient, which was the old guard. I actually met a Triad guy, so he was the older guard.
Yeah.
But the new guard of retail media providers, solution providers like Zitcha, are calling themselves the unified front door. What does that mean, and how does that help a retailer versus what's become before?
Firstly, I think the unified front door is actually having a view of what inventory I have to sell. I think a lot of the retailers we work with are moving from very siloed structures that they don't have a really clear view of all of the inventory they have to sell and how do they sell it through one spot. So I think firstly, from a retailer perspective, is having a unified view of all of the inventory, whether it's on-site inventory, off-site inventory, whether it's in-store inventory, being able to see that in one spot is the connection of them being able to see their media business and see the value and what they've got to sell and when they've got to sell it. But then from an advertiser perspective, the unified view is the ability to buy across all those channels really simply. The way we've approached it is everything that comes to market from a retailer can be self-serve. So everything from an end cap to a banner, a sponsored product, which is obviously where a lot of vendors play, to now the unlocking of the store more broadly as they're digitising. And so that's the view of having a unified front door. And I think for us, it's allowing the retailers to maximise the value of that, maximise the yield that they're going to get out of that, and sell it really efficiently and deliver it efficiently as well.
One of the questions that comes up with retailers is how much of that inventory is actually understood when they start these projects versus how much of your work really is sitting down with retailers and understanding, look, you have all this potential value that isn't being unlocked, that if you could just think of it as you could sell it, you could generate additional margins and revenue. Obviously, a lot of retailers live on thin margins, which is why retail media is so attractive to them. And so how much of that do you think what you guys are doing in terms of working with retailers, in terms of helping them identify and unlocking new inventory?
Yeah, I think even their old inventory, getting a view of what their utilization is, like it's just really basic stuff.
Let's talk about the old inventory. My favorite, the shelf wobblers.
Yeah,
the
shelf
blades.
wobblers. Yeah, I never thought
What
I'd be
the hell
doing.
is a shelf wobbler?
Yeah.
It's funny, so Tom's the retail guy and I'm the ad tech guy.
Yeah.
And so yesterday we learned that the printed coupon sheet at the front of a store is called an RMN. And I'm like, okay, I've
I
never
didn't
heard
even know that one.
Yeah.
But the
A
wobbler
shelf
is one of my
wobbler,
favorite.
okay.
It's like that flexible piece of plastic, and then the little signage that hangs off it wobbles.
And literally the wobbler that
That's
hangs
too
on the
hilarious.
edge of shelf. Yeah. So I never thought I'd be building
It's
ads.
a technical term.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I never thought I'd be building ads.
Functional.
Yeah.
Ad tech to deliver shelf wobblers. I think one of the things for us is that visibility for the retailer is really important. Visibility means they actually know what they've sold and what they haven't sold. And we see the trajectory on two paths. And one of the things that having a unified front door gave us the ability to see was for RMNs to really work, they're going to have their RMN teams that have typically sat within e-com's been the major driver of RMNs. But now as they're starting to unlock the store, they're unlocking the merchant and the relationships that the merchants are having on joint business planning and being able to see that long-term view. So what's sold in through joint business planning, and then what are the opportunities for the RMN teams to sell up and down and across that inventory as well. We believe that for RMNs to have long-term value, those two things need to work really well together. If you've got and there's typically friction that sits in that relationship between the merchandising team and the RMN teams, because it's like, are you selling just a new form of media that I should be selling within my joint business planning? We believe that unlocking that and being able to see that in one spot is where we actually get the value creation of what inventory can be sold. Yeah, haven't sold certain things within your joint business planning. How do you then lean on the retail media teams to then sell that inventory? So you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul when I've just got visibility on the bucket of money that I'm selling over here in retail media and you're not seeing in the merchandise structure.
One of the questions that pops up in your, call it inventory, ad inventory, is I think the retailers are trying to figure out how much money can I really make from RMNs. And I think the question that follows that is, okay, then you're helping them understand, well, here's what you have to sell today. Here's what already exists, and you're helping unlock that. How do your clients or customers look at how much inventory they have, or helping think about the value of that inventory? Do they have enough? I think one of the big questions is we start looking at regional retailers, tier 2, tier 3, whatever you want to use, versus national or tier 1. Do folks have enough inventory to make RMMs a legitimate, viable business? And I think that's one of the questions. We've heard good stories about regionals having a ton of value they can unlock, but I think you can give an interesting perspective as you help people figure out what do they have to sell and where's it stack in, and is it enough, and how big of a business should they really be thinking about what RMNs can deliver?
Yeah, I think every retailer, there's a certain size of retailer that you've got to be to build an RMN. I don't think everyone is going to play in the space, even if you've got inventory and you've got the ability to sell it. So I think that's something that we've seen. We've went through the journey of the last few years of us building. We've helped retailers build RMNs where they've just decided, actually, this is not going to work, and turn them off. So I think there is as a minimum starting point for the retailers to have a fair crack at building a network.
Is that like a GMV number?
I think typically that's the way we structure it, is the GMV number, that are they worth talking to or they're not. And the bigger the GMV number is obviously the better for these networks. So
is it $500 million, 250?
Yeah. My view is it's probably $500 million plus. That's typically
I think that's
where
been my
stay.
little finger in the air kind of number too.
Yeah, that's us. We know that if it drops below that, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard yards. Again, some smaller retailers, it might be the efficiency driver, right? So if it's run through merchandise and I'm running a $250 million business, right, you can still get good efficiency gains and how you sell what you sell. So there's still value creation there. We're not going to be all running out to buy that as part of our national buy, but there is definitely value creation for the smaller guys to be able to do something with their current suppliers, but they're probably not going to bring in non-endemic money, for example.
Yeah, I think to tease this out a little bit more, there's not a lot. You talk a little bit about how you're going to have all three, the on-site, the off-site, and potentially even in-store. And in my opinion, very few, if any, retailers are doing all three.
Yeah.
And to put it back on you, why wouldn't it be, even if you are small, if you have a trade program, why couldn't you have some sort of benefit from putting all three legs on the stool?
Yeah, I agree with you. There will be benefit. But the question that I look at is the amount of time to stand these things up and the focus on it, right? Is the value creation there? No doubt for us, as a business for us, like we love your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 if they hit the minimum number. But there'll be a play out of the box where it's like really simple to onboard, no code to onboard, and there'll be a play in that space. There's no doubt about that.
It sounds like it's a timing issue.
It's a timing
maturity of the space issue.
Right.
Yes,
100%.
Yeah.
Like, I think even if you look at the maturity curve of even the tier 1 retailers, they're still pretty early, right?
Especially in store.
In store,
unbelievably
like
early.
there's so many steps for them to grow, let alone the guys that a lot smaller than that.
But also, you don't just go up the staircase.
No, you don't.
You go up a couple steps, and you come
take
be like,
a step.
I'm going to go back because I don't like my margin today. I'm going to go back and change who my partners are, and then I'm going to go back up the steps.
I think the big thing that I've found really diving into this space is that this is led by the retail. I think there's a lot of media trying to push into the space, but you cannot take this out of the retailer being the first core part of the second part of media. That's why, in my view of like, where does this live? Typically buying in from the top down is obviously a critical thing for retailers to be successful. My view is long term, I think the merchant teams will own this. I just think it's just a natural thing. It's a core function of retail. And for anything to be a core operating process, it needs to be driven by the core structure of what the retail does. And I think we've got a lot of retailers that it sits outside of that. And I think we're starting to see some larger retailers go, actually, retail media and merchandise needs to be at the table at the same time. But who owns it? My view is that it probably should be living with the merchant.
I think that makes a ton of sense. As we've talked about the history of retail media, and given Tom's background in the space, one of the things that, as an outsider, that's exactly the observation that I look at and go, this just seems like it's the newest version of trade marketing and trade dollars. And I understand why it might have started elsewhere, but I think it naturally has to be, when you talk about the three legs, on-site, off-site, in-store, like a holistic process makes sense, and it's a better way of thinking about it holistically when you're talking to these vendors. And even maybe the non-endemic pieces, that's really what RMNs become, is that's really just means non-endemic dollars. Yeah. But I think anything endemic should be part of a JVP or something like that. And what I love about Zitcha is the idea that, if we look at all the potential inventory and assets we have and actually catalog it, in-store, off-site, on-site, look at holistically, I think people, it's such an obvious answer when you're hearing your story and your product story, which is, of course I should have a holistic view of all the assets that I can package up and work with my vendors to deliver the best program possible.
Totally.
The most holistic program possible. What's funny is we talk to retailers and those teams, they're struggling to, how do I get, a lot of times they're not even getting the trade dollars they want today. So the funny thing is, people are like, I've maxed out trade dollars, that's why I'm doing RMNs. A lot of times, actually, I'm not even getting the trade dollars I think I want. And RMN, meaning more digital or other type of opportunities. Digital could mean on-site and in-store.
Yep.
That unlocks just dollars that I'm not getting anyway, because it excites the vendors in terms of the types of programs that they can put together that are interesting to them. And I think that's one of the interesting things is if I have a holistic view of the assets, I can do a much better job being creative as a retailer packaging something for.
Well, at the end of the day, this is a margin play for the retailer, right? So this, whether it's coming from trade dollars, whether it's coming from an RMN team, this holistically is the way that they try and find margins. So I think that's right. And I think we're starting to see, the things that we're starting to see bubble up is that a lot of RMNs have been built in managed service. So, and a lot of RMNs, when you listen to, they talk very top line numbers, right? Our growth is top line. I think we're starting to get to the first phase of going, actually, we need to start to really look at what drops out the bottom. I've seen a lot of stacks. It's like, how do they actually make money out of this? Because for everything that they're doing, they're losing margin on it. So I think we're going to start to see a lot of that. I think we're going to start to see movement to self-service.
And you mentioned when we talked earlier that you have something like 55% of the networks are self-serve. Yeah. Tell me more about how
So
this
a lot
works.
of the networks, especially the networks that have gone from 0 to 1, their mentality is like, how do I scale a network without a whole heap of heads?
Yeah.
From that perspective, and this is where the single view really starts to come to be valuable. Yeah. How do you get people to self-serve when they're used to having managed service? So self-service through channels like Meta or Google, that muscle's been built by advertisers already, or they're used to buying like that. Their teams are really happy to do that. Then they start to move from that learnt muscle into, how do I then self-serve across the website? How do I then self-serve across screens? Or so a lot of that is very structured around how we would build a network out. We sometimes actually start, instead of starting on-site first, we start off-site. So we start to build the muscle around the network. The retailer has a really clear view of, we want self-serve as the key driver, and then that's typically how our networks start to evolve.
And then you get all that ready, and you have all the permissions set,
Yep.
and you have this great dashboard, and then you realize that you've made it to 2010,
Yes.
and now there's going to be generative AI capabilities. There's
Yes.
going to be agentic capabilities,
Yep.
and you realize you're already behind. So what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on this, I think this is going to be a really interesting space over the next few years. As a retailer, if you go to I think about the first step is like, how do I transition from a million different spreadsheets into a single source of truth, which is the unified front door? I think what the agentic layer is going to bring into it is the ability for me as the brand to be able to build my agents, to be able to buy across multiple RMNs at the same time. So this level of worry about aggregation and those sorts of things, I think will start to pull back. I think that will be driven through that. But the retailers themselves need to still be governing. Like, governance is going to be a big part of the future. So number one, having all your data structured in the right spot, having the governance of who gets to see what, when do they get to see it, how the margin profile of each of those things will still need to be governed. And that's the thing that we're working with a lot of our retailers to go, right, all the structures in place to allow that next layer of agentic to play out.
So let's go a little deeper there, because I don't know if listeners are going to understand what would that mean. You started to sound like you were saying you could use Zitcha to manage across retailers. Is that sort of where you're going?
That's the way this will play, in my view. Like, aggregation is going to be a key thing for the advertiser, because they're going to have, in the US at the moment, they've got over 200 RMNs. That's only going to get bigger. And the ability for that aggregation layer to make the buying experience simple is going to be a critical thing for growth. So I think the agentic layer, from the way I'm looking at it, is that it will give the ability for advertisers to be able to build their agents around what they're going to buy and where they're going to buy. They might build agents for trade. They might buy them for specific parts of the buying process. But this will come from them. I know that from our perspective, we'll help build those as well, but definitely the RMN stack needs to be able to take that in and push it out.
If I had what should be the bleeding edge tech today, 5, 6, 8 years ago, the things I would put that on would be, we have a problem with creative approval. You've got the brand, you got the retailer, you got the publisher, potentially, if you care about the publisher. How are we going to make sure this creative, is that the type of thing that you're...
Yeah, I think there'll be really specific points. Like, creative's a great one. If I'm Coke and I've run campaigns for the last 20 years, how do I start to go, right, I want to know what worked here for this specific audience, and then you've got retailers that have also run campaigns for the last 20 years. How do we connect those dots together? So I think there's going to be really specific pieces that is going to create massive value. Creative as a layer within RMNs at the moment is still untalked about. Yet in any publisher business like a Meta, for example, that's where all the creative optimization drives your ROAS numbers a lot higher than running sort of pack shot on white background. So I think we're gonna start to see a lot of that stuff play out just as we're going up the maturity curve. I think agentic is at the very top. Like, this is something that you've got retail media growth and you've got AI, sort of two massive shifts in the market happening at the same time. So I think it's for retailers to have a view of what that's going to look like.
I'm just happy there's somebody like you who knows where the creative best practices are on the social networks, can bring that back down to there, because it's always embarrassing what the retail product looks like.
And the other thing is, like, retail products built on a catalogue of literally pack shot white background. Right. How do I automate something that is really very low down the creativity layer? So I think we're going to start to see, when I talk about creative, you're going to start to see like product level video coming into that product feed. So the ability for advertisers to market at a SKU level. I think that's one thing that when we're seeing it, because I'm running a sponsored product and everything's about the SKU and the conversion, but I think where it starts to get pretty exciting is that I'm going to be able to run marketing, if it's on Meta or if it's on YouTube or if it's on Snap, the ability to run that through product level video and then track that down to a conversion within.
Yeah, are you bringing that type of creative to the PDP? Because I've heard from the Digital Shelf Institute, Lauren is saying, if your PDP doesn't have great video on it, people are just going to bounce. It's just not. So what's your view on all that?
My view is that video is the most engaging form of creativity, and everything that the retailer has at their disposal should be starting to move down that path, whether it's on e-com, whether it's in the path to purchase. It's something that's got to be connected to the SKU, though. I think that's the big thing. Creativity at a brand layer. You might run a brand campaign and then you'll run your trade activations that are very SKU focused. I think we're going to see marketing start to get really focused around the SKU, but how do I bring the brand story into the SKU?
Yeah, and I think that's probably where the AI helps, because otherwise it's the brand, you never get
don't have enough resource to be able to do it. Yeah.
But you would, even if whatever you generate, it'd be like, no, that's not it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
it's interesting listening to the conversation around creatives, and I think that's one where, as people are building RMMs, don't necessarily think about that. I'm going to make money and I run ads. It's like the underpants gnomes with the question marks in the middle. This is the question marks in the middle in terms of the operational pieces that'll start coming together. But I think part of that is that retailers have a lot to learn from online publishers in terms of how does ads work. And the publishers went through this 20 years ago with the rise of ad networks and digital advertising. And one of the things that we've seen is the rise of partnerships between publishers and retailers. Again, Best Buy and CNET's a good example of one people like to point to and talk about. But I think there's an interesting opportunity for publishers to inform retailers of how this whole ad thing's going to work. What's your perspective on it? You have the social advertising background, but I don't know if, from a Zitcha standpoint, if you guys thought and started making connections or seen connections between retailers and publishers in terms of how they can learn. Publishers need retailers from a data and an attribution standpoint.
Yes.
Retailers need publishers from how do you sell advertising, especially non-endemics. I think there's some real opportunities there. I'd be curious to your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity there. I still think there's a lot of learning to be done by the retailers as they go down that path of what publishers they're gonna partner with, where they're gonna place their bets. I still think we're a see ball, hit ball when it comes to that at the moment, but I definitely think there's a huge upside in that crossover of learning. The maturity curve that I went through with Meta for 10 years, you can see this playing out in retail media, all of the pieces that they've gone through to build every part of the playbook. My view of it is that for retailers to get in and really understand that piece, there's a lot of value that sits there for how they create their network and what they do. Yeah, it's probably an untapped resource for a lot of retailers, to be honest.
I want to thank you for coming and not only bringing the innovation, but also bringing us some new Oz-isms or heaps of heads I'm going to use. I don't know what else I heard in there, but when I mined the episode for, I think there were a few other gems in there.
Yeah, there's a few that I drop every now and again.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for being on the Middlemen.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys.
Right.